Good Wednesday morning. This is a great letter to the Colossians. It's his story. He's giving you a description of what he did, but you catch in there, Paul, though he doesn't say to the guys in the gospel, I owe you, in a sense, you've got to confirm me. His authority stands on its own, but he does go, in a sense, to share with them his apostolic mission. See? At the same time, he recognizes at the same time that Peter has authority he doesn't have. Okay? So he's acknowledging the authority of Peter, but the gospel doesn't depend upon Peter. It depends on Christ. St. Paul is as much an apostle as Peter is, but Peter's the head of the church. Paul's not. And Paul acknowledges that. Even though you'll see at the end he straightens out Peter. I'll show it to you. He says, brothers and sisters, after 14 years I again went up to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along also. I went up in accord with the revelation, and I presented to them the gospel that I preached to the Gentiles, but privately to those of repute, so that I may not be running or have run in vain. It's a humility there. He says, I'm sharing it with you. Okay, let's see what you think, okay? Huh? I think he was really asking not about the core of the gospel, but that was he's going about it in the right way. That's what I think, because he doesn't depend. The gospel's Christ. He doesn't need them for that. But anyway, it's my 2 cents. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter to the circumcised, for the one who worked in Peter for the apostle to the circumcised, worked also in me for the Gentiles. And when they recognized the grace bestowed upon me, James and Cephas and John, who were reputed to be pillars, gave me and Barnabas their right hands in partnership, that we go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. I think I got it just now. When he goes to them, he's there to tell them, I've been commissioned to go to the Gentiles. You take care of the Jewish Christians. I'm going after the Gentiles. I think that's what he needed to be clarified with. And he needed their blessing. Not their approval, but as much their blessing, I think. That he was going, not the gospel, that he was going to the Gentiles. I think that's what it is. Only we were to be mindful of the poor, which is the very thing I was eager to do. Now this is the best part. I love this section. Oh God, this is good. And when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he clearly was wrong. So I took on Peter. This is where you see Peter stumbling around. And Paul straightened him out. For until some people came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. Peter used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he began to draw back and separated himself because he was afraid of the circumcised. He was afraid of the Jews. And the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with him, the Jewish Christians, with the result that even Barnabas, my own guy, was carried away by their hypocrisy. When I saw that they were not on the right road, I straightened them out. Let me write that again. But when I saw that they were not on the right road, in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of all, if you, though a Jew, are living like a Gentile, not like a Jew, how can you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews? What's the matter with you? Straighten them right out. See, you got to know something else. Peter always struggled with that. Paul didn't. Paul converted in a split second. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He got it. Paul unpacked that. He understood that the Christian community, that Christ is the body of Christ is the church, and the fulfillment of that is the completion of the law. We are not bound by the Jewish law. I just said it pathetically. I'm sorry. We are not bound by the Jewish law at all. We are not Jews. We are Christians. And there's no difference between a Gentile Christian and a Jewish Christian. None. And that's it. Peter is influenced by the Jewish Christians who are saying, you can't be with Gentiles. You see, the church learns as she goes along. She has her creedal beliefs and her theories, her theological understandings, but she learns as she goes along. You see that when the impact of the church moves out of a particular culture into another culture, she has to learn what it all means. I think that, for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. There was it's called Europeanization. I mentioned it 817 times, or is it 718 times? I forget. Whatever it is, there was a belief that up until very, very recently, there was a belief that before you could become a Christian, you had to be a European. It's called Europeanization. And missionaries very often, especially Protestants, were notorious for it. And that is, they changed the culture of the people they were seeking to convert into Europeans, converting them culturally into Europeans before they would baptize them into the church, into Christianity. They wreaked havoc here in the Americas on the East Coast. They wreaked havoc among the Native Americans. They forced them into what they call Little Red Schoolhouse. I think that's what they called it. Tried to turn these little Native Americans into European Americans before they became Christian, Indian, American, whatever, Christians, you see? It was a disaster. They took them from their tribes. They tore them out of their cultures. You know, St. Paul would be flipping his grave if he saw that. Okay. I'm kind of grateful that the Jesuits did not. And the Jesuits, I think very, very strongly about the Jesuits that founded St. Louis University, of which I work. Okay, I'm a member. A member of that community, of the institution of St. Louis University in 1818 was formed. The same guys that formed it worked their way all the way up the Missouri River, and they were missionaries up into the Dakotas and all that area. And they did not have Little Red Schoolhouses. They did not pull the Native American into the schools here and to be transformed into first Europeans and then Christians. Instead, they brought the gospel to the Christian world, to the Indian world. And they planted the seed there. And it's the only place that I am aware of that the seed actually flourished, that the community's Black Elk comes out of that. Great shaman, Sioux shaman, who's now up for canonization, became a Catholic deacon. That seed was planted by the Jesuits. You know, they did the same in China. They became more Chinese than the Chinese. They did not try to make the Chinese into Europeans, but tried to bring the gospel so the Chinese could become Chinese Christians. Same here. That's exactly what they should have been doing. They modeled how the faith is to be preached. They modeled the preaching of St. Paul. He didn't try to turn the Gentile into a Jew. He tried to convert the Gentile into a Christian Gentile, a Gentile Christian. That's true. I think my fellow Passionists were that way. Our men went to China. They became more Chinese than the Chinese. They started even looking Chinese. You should have seen Bishop Cuthbert O'Gara, who ordained me to the minor orders back in 1966. 67. He even got the facial. He was as American as he was a Canadian, okay? But I'm telling you, when you looked at him, you could see China written all over him. He'd spent 5 years in a Chinese communist concentration camp, okay? He's a martyr. He survived. But I'm going to tell you something. One of the great privileges of my life was to live with him, okay? And so many of the other men, Bonnie Griffiths, so many of those men. Holy Lord. And how they loved it. I told you what Linus Lombard said. Well, he's an old man. And I said to him, he had just been out of China. I mean, he'd been in prison too. I don't know. This was in the early, I guess around 62 or 63. And that was only 7, 8 years out of China. And I said to him, Father Linus, would you ever go back? He said, I'd walk back if I could. That's how much he loved China. And he wanted to be Chinese to the Chinese. That's the heart of the gospel, you see. Peter stumbled with that. Paul didn't. See, and the European church has stumbled with it. I don't mean presently, I mean the culture. First make them Europeans and then make them Christians. Forget about it. Just preach the gospel into the world, you see. So it's a common struggle. See, it's a common struggle. I'm proud of the fact, my fellow Passionists, we're in the great tradition of the Jesuit missionary. We came to preach the gospel to a people and to become and love the people we preach to. Not make them like us, make us like them, except we bring the gospel, a gospel they can believe, and a gospel that will transform them culturally from within, their way. Thank you, Frankie Sinatra, their way. I'm old. Our great-grandchildren will see Christianity flourish in Asia and places like that, with a great Asian coloration, language, and culture, and profoundly Christian.